Well, welcome everyone. I'm Alex Altamari, and I'm going to serve as the moderator here. I was looking forward to this one because when they gave this topic, I'm thinking, gosh, what do these three things have in common? Climate, security, and deep tech investing. And I came to realize, well, quite a bit. They're all very hard. They're not really where you start out as investors, because the capitalist pursuit of investing is to put in money and as quickly as possible, return as much as possible. And in these three categories, that's inherently very, very hard to do. And the timelines kind of work against you in many ways for these three. So that creates a tension between the typical VC model and the need for quick, large returns and exits with the patience and timelines necessary to sell into these industries or develop the technologies to support them. They say if you're the smartest guy in the room, you should find another room. I'm pretty confident I belong right here next to these guys. Here we have Raj Kapoor, the founder of Climactic, a VC niched in climate change, sustainability, and circular economy. Ernie Bio, the managing director of ForgePoint Capital, which is focused on cybersecurity and infrastructure software. And Gareth Keane, partner at Prometheus Ventures, which focuses on deep tech that matures large industries. So to start off right now, let's talk about that tension between timelines and the timelines it takes to mature these technologies and the expected from your LPs and investors that you're going to produce returns. How do you handle that tension? Or am I making something out of nothing?
Sure, I can kick it off. We tend to invest in industries and companies that often have a dual use application. So in fact, a lot of our LP base is super strategic. And timelines, when you're dealing with sovereign wealth funds or very large sort of policy-driven investors, they tend to be pretty forgiving. So we are focused on getting a return for our LPs, but we do find that our LPs are naturally very understanding of some of the challenges of building deep tech companies, because the outcomes and sort of the kind of, I guess, the second order, third order benefits they see from that they're willing to wait for those kind of timeframes.
So in climate tech, I look at it as there's really two different types of climate tech. One is where there is more, I would say, deep tech, and typically there's either material innovation or there's hardware innovation. And in that case, especially when we're talking about material innovations, such as batteries as an example, or new compounds that are created out of CO2 emissions, we did one of those investments. Those typically don't fit in the 10-year exit model, although I don't think venture fits in the 10-year exit model anymore either. But you see some funds that have come up, like, for example, Breakthrough Energy Ventures, which is Bill Gates' fund, that explicitly has a 30-year mark on it to handle that situation. In our case, we're looking at software-first companies that are potentially using commodity hardware. But they really look like the curve of growth is a little bit more like the typical software company that we would see in general tech. I would say the change, though, is that in general tech, a lot of what we saw was digitization of everything, and that in and of itself is the proposition. Here, with decarbonization, usually it's the software influencing an atom. And so when you're influencing atoms, that does take out the timeline as well, even though it's not deep tech. So we've informed our LPs, like, look, this is probably going to be a little bit longer, but it's not going to be a 30-year fund.
Interesting. And
yeah, for cybersecurity, something that's unique to our industry and for our portfolio construction is we have point solutions and platforms. And a point solution is a product that does one thing very, very well. It's you're able to combat, because we have unlike other industries, we have a persistent adversary. We have state-sponsored, which we call APTs, and we also have criminal organizations that have been responsible for a lot of ransomware. So point solutions, usually the whole time is 3 to 5 years. A large platform like a Palo Alto Networks or CrowdStrike will buy that point solution at a premium, plug it into the platform because they can't keep up with the innovation. On the platform side, that's where the whole time can be 8, 10, 12, 14 years. And that's, to the other comments, that's where we kind of go outside of a typical fund life cycle of 10 years. Those are a lot harder to make. But what I tell I usually start at the Series A, I tell all my companies, you're a point solution until proven otherwise. Because it takes time to get to a full-fledged platform, but that's kind of the holy grail.
So to that extent, are there certain types of business models that lend themselves better than others to the work you guys are doing? Go ahead, Ernie, I guess you can start.
I mean, for us, we're focused on 100% software, but not specifically SaaS. So most of our companies are SaaS, but we have a few companies that were bootstrapped doing services. Services is if you look at the spend in cybersecurity globally, services is by far where the lion's share of the money goes. So those are companies that will come in, they're bootstrapped, and then we'll make it a tech-enabled service or build out an entire product. But for the most part, it's defense and SaaS. The only offense we do is pen testing, which is more of on the services or tech-enabled services side.
Yeah, I think for us, we have seen an interesting evolution around some of the full stack hardware software solutions that we have funded, where they have evolved into almost a hardware as a service or robotics as a service type model, which more generalist investors, I think, can get their heads around. It's not that one-time, high CapEx spend for a piece of hardware. There is an ongoing kind of revenue stream they can get more comfortable with. On a lot of our dual use investments, the US government is often the first customer, the best customer for some of these companies. And I think there's still a bit of hesitation, a bit of fear maybe from the early stage investment community around how those revenue models work. I think there's a class of security-focused, defense-focused investors who are comfortable with the US government as a customer, and we're pretty comfortable, because it can be transformational for some of these companies, right? You get this amazing non-dilutive, continuous support for stuff that is very, very important to sort of the US and Western aligned countries. So we see it as a win-win scenario.
So when we first got into, again, we do software first climate tech. I expected it to be pretty generic, mostly SaaS. And I was really surprised to see the variation. So I'll give you 3 quick examples. One is we invested in a company that does apartment building charging. So they have these really low-cost outlets that they put in the parking areas because it's one of the biggest adoptions. There's 3 of them usually, and they don't work ever. This is doing it kind of a slower charge. So they tweak the business model, and they're getting a percentage of the energy that's pulled in, but they're not charging on a per-unit basis at all, so that they're giving a motivation to the apartment building to actually put as many units as possible, and then they're on the hook for utilization because that's the way that they make money. So I like that model. Second one in software, we talked about this in the last panel, but it's a very sophisticated AI platform that creates a digital twin of massive organizations. So the Merino Wool Association in New Zealand has 450 farms, and they create a digital twin and fill in the data gaps using AI so that they can figure out how to go to net zero. But the trick was they weren't selling it when it was a SaaS service, because people are using that tool in the capital planning process, which only happens every so often. So what they figured out was, let's figure if we can put it away so it's in the capital planning as a CapEx. And as a result, they're getting like millions of dollars, and it's not hitting the OpEx there. And the CFO is the one who's buying it, so they're really excited by it, is a second model that I found interesting. And then the last one is Robotics-as-a-Service, was mentioned before. What's interesting there is that we back founders that are incredibly good at robotics, which is really hard, especially this is field robotics. They do solar utility farm construction. There's a whole new skill set they have to learn, which I was at Lyft before, the chief strategy officer, and so the game was all about utilization of assets. If you're a good roboticist, you don't necessarily know how to run an operation with utilization, so new business models also require some capabilities that entrepreneurs may not be familiar with.
Thanks. And so at this early stage, you guys are, in many ways, the beacons that make sense of these new and different approaches to things. But then it goes to hand off to subsequent round B, C, and beyond, which may be more on the kind of mainstream or generalist investors thing. Is it a challenge to frame and tee up the companies and get it into the mainstream investment pipelines, or has that been easy for you?
So I would say, and this relates back to the question you were asking earlier, which is the trade-off between impact and returns. It's a little probably more pronounced in climate, because that is what we're about, is reducing carbon emissions. And when we're pitching a round, a later stage round and trying to get a general investor, they really don't want to hear about impact. It's all about returns. So what that means is that these companies have to really stand on their own, and they have to have what I would call a dual benefit, which is that they are generating business value for their customer and they're reducing emissions. If it's just reducing emissions, I worry about that follow-on capital that you're bringing up.
I think we have certainly seen over the last 2 years, as we've moved out of that wonderful zero interest rate sort of period that we were in, it's become a lot harder at the later stage for some of these companies that are quite capital intensive. If you're launching a communications constellation into MEO or GEO, you're probably spending north of $1 billion to get that up there. Those have become pretty challenging propositions for the wider investment community. Now, the good news is that there's a lot of geopolitical support for entities and for initiatives like that. So we're finding an interesting mix of later stage dollars coming from not just traditional, Series B growth investors, but more from maybe entities that would not have been on a cap table previously. I think the US has been very forward thinking with things like the Office of Strategic Capital, which is identifying some of these gaps, right, around whether it's supply chain resilience, whether it's, supply of critical inputs into various processes. They, I think, are thinking about that in a really good way.
Let's keep going in that direction a little bit. On the topic of policy and regulations and government programs, it touches so much of what all three of you are doing. Are there any policies or regulations that are holding back progress in your fields, or some that have been really powerful enablers of progress in your field that your portfolio companies have been able to take advantage of? Does anything come to mind that you think perhaps doesn't get enough attention, good or bad?
I can speak for cybersecurity. I mean, there's been a push over the last few years from the White House with executive orders, with CISA, which is the cyber arm of the Department of Homeland Security, and it's really, within cybersecurity, we're not impact, we're mission driven. So a lot of our companies are started by former DoD and intelligence community folks. So very mission driven, but it's a public-private partnership. You look at what happened with Change Healthcare getting hacked a few months ago. One of my companies was a first responder there. You look at, I have another company that focuses on SMBs. They've been ransomwared, in unbelievable amounts, and usually that leads to a company failing. So for us, it's regulation. It hasn't been regulation specifically, but it's been that public-private partnership that's helped propel the industry and help protect businesses and consumers.
In the climate space, it's interesting. If I look at what's missing, it's one simple thing, which is putting a price on carbon emissions. If we just did that, the entire industry would value it and move in that direction, but it's missing, and I don't think we're going to see it, and certainly I don't think we're going to see it in November of 2024. So what's positive, there's no stick, but there is a carrot, and the carrot is the IRA. Why is it called the Inflation Reduction Act? Because that's what it needed to get passed, but really it's a huge spending bill that goes, a lot of it targeted towards climate tech. And what we're seeing is that the DOE especially is filling up gaps with really nice loans or grants in areas where venture would find it difficult. Or in the scale up, that dead zone between, okay, I got a product working, but I can't get debt for whatever the equipment is or the machinery. So how can I fill in that gap? It's really starting to happen. EV charging, the incentives that are there are significant as well. So almost every single one of our companies is in the honey pot. But what we're trying to be careful about, which is mistakes in the past, is can the business stand alone without it? Are these accelerants or are these support systems? And I'd rather invest in an accelerant versus a support system.
Fascinating distinction, thanks.
Yeah, I think, Raj talked about the IRA. I think the CHIPS Act is another great example of, government support for a critical and very, very important sector of the economy, the semiconductor supply chain. I think you can look at, it's not necessarily a good thing, but some of the geopolitical situation we find ourselves in globally has been a real tailwind for companies that are maybe touching that dual use piece. The US government has some very exquisite instruments in orbit that it uses to generate all kinds of interesting intelligence information. We can't really share that with allies or aligned countries around the world. So third-party commercial companies in areas like Earth observation have been very, very well supported by selling very similar information to allies, like in the Ukraine, for example. So, there are positives, there are negatives. It's not great for us all as a society to have this geopolitical stuff going on, but I think it is very helpful for some companies, and we think it's a tailwind that will keep going.
It occurred to me that all three of you are working in fields that require a high level of interdisciplinary coordination among the teams that your firms are building. Can you talk a little bit about current workforce trends and what you're seeing, and if that's a limiting challenge, or if there's an abundance of the kind of talent that you need and convening it has come naturally?
So I think you look at that from two perspectives. One is portfolio companies, and certainly there it is challenging, I think, to find great people, especially if you're building a company in the Bay Area. If you're looking for somebody who has AI expertise, it's become really expensive. We actually have been pretty active investing globally for the last 10 years, and we have seen a real trend of very strong sort of back office technical talent coming out of places like Eastern Europe. So companies building with corporate functions in the US, maybe in Silicon Valley, but leveraging very strong, potentially from a founder relationship, engineering teams in places like Budapest and these random cities in Eastern Europe that just have very strong technical schools. We've seen great success with companies coming out of entities or ecosystems like Munich in Germany, where again there's a very strong, or ETH and EPFL in Switzerland. For our team, I agree. I think it's very much an interdisciplinary thing. I think if you look at the partner level sort of folks we have on our team, it's very different backgrounds, and that sort of holistic view of startups I think is helpful for us.
What's interesting in terms of workforce that I'm finding is that Europe is actually a better market in terms of customers of a lot of climate tech, including software. There's more regulation in the positive, or I should say, depending on how you look at it, but regulation that creates need. I'll give you an example. There's something called the LCA. It's a life cycle carbon assessment. And usually what you should be doing is if you have a new building, you would do a life cycle carbon assessment. And it's complicated because you got to figure out how deep do you go in the value chain where there's carbon creation and sequestration and all that. And what you typically do is hire expensive consultants, and it takes forever. Well, France just said, okay, everyone needs to do it next year. And all of a sudden, they're scrambling. So if you are an LCA software company in the US and you don't have the capability to go into France and sell there, which is not easy, you're probably going to be outsold by a European competitor, and then they're probably going to become the dominant player. So we don't talk about this. We talk about China, but we have a risk that a lot of what we're doing in climate, actually the EU is going to come out on top because the demand is higher there.
I was just going to say, I think the EU is likely to be the first entity to set a price for carbon. I think that's probably going to come way faster than it comes here, to be honest. So yeah, I would agree with that.
Yeah, on the cybersecurity side, I'd answer it in two parts. One is on the developer side, we have companies that have their technical teams, India, Estonia, Croatia, Poland, even Ukraine still. On the practitioner side, so if you think of the folks that are responding as part of a security operations center, there's been a severe shortage of talent, and a lot amongst cybersecurity in general, a massive shortage that will never be solved, except with automation and now with Gen AI. So you see one of the first big applications of Gen AI is helping SOC analysts to do their job. I think of it like they're putting on an Iron Man suit, so you can take someone with minimal skill that can work at 10x what they would without that ability to find the needles in the haystack, whether they're looking at logs or what have you.
One thing I also wanted to mention that I found interesting, that may be relevant to people in San Diego, is that a lot of the concepts from other sectors are applying over. So I'll give you one example, which is that communications networking. It's all about, there's routers and switches, there's packets, it's getting the packets into the right place with efficiency and speed and power, et cetera. So a lot of people that figured that out then applied that into the ad tech world, because the ad tech world is about taking advertising, and when it became more programmatic, it was all about that. And then there's bidding and all of that. Now it's distributed energy. And it's that same thing around, we're going to be buying and selling energy. We're going to treat energy like packets. We need routers and switches, kind of exist today, but in terms of the information routing that's there and the auctioning of it. So we're seeing general tech entrepreneurs coming out of the woodwork saying, I think I can solve this problem.
That's fascinating. Where should we go from here? Well, I guess one of the other things I was thinking was about the chain of investment. Often angels come before you all, but these industries can be really difficult as an individual angel investor or even as an angel investor network to look at and consider. Any advice or thoughts if you were speaking to a group of angel investors on how they might be able to be better angels and or accelerator programs for that matter, be able to better create the opportunities you're looking for and help nurture those early stage entrepreneurs that are considering going into these fields?
I would say to talk to us. Well, with cybersecurity specifically, there's a lot of companies, there's a lot of noise at the early stage, and it's very hard if you don't do it for a living to really understand the nuanced differences, because there tend to be a lot of features trying to masquerade as products, and there's a lot of kind of Me Too companies. So for my friends that are angel investors or go really early, I always say, hey, send me their pitch deck or just tell me what they do and give me 2 minutes and I'll let you know if like there's something here. But it's very hard. That's why we like to stay focused.
I don't think I have very much to add to that. I think maybe one thing is I think one of the great things about the areas that Raj invested in and Ernie invested in that we invest in is that they tend to be very mission driven. So there's actually a cohort of angels out there who get excited and get enthusiastic about putting money into these companies that are trying to solve real hard, thorny, super complex problems. And then there's also probably some good indications from very early funding from things like SBIRs and STTRs and NIH funding and stuff like that you can use as an indicator of teams and entrepreneurs who are maybe on an interesting trajectory.
Two things I would say. One is that typically in the past in general tech, an angel could be kind of cavalier and be like, here's 25K, here's 50K, here's 100K, let's do it. Financing in general is hard, but certainly for these areas that a lot of people are not familiar with as much. And so I really ask the angel, is there a minimum on the round? And if not, you really need to make one because you could be sitting stuck with not enough capital to even get to the next stage in doing that. That's one. Two, I would say that it's been refreshing in climate today, and I think this could change as more capital comes in the system, is that it's very, very inclusive, and there's a lot of sharing that's going on. There's something called climatedraft.org that we're a part of that anyone can come on and connect in with all of the different people that are involved in the ecosystem, whether they're executives or investors or advisors, and I've never seen such free-flowing information. Because of that mission, probably, it's like, okay, if I don't do the deal, I just wanted someone to do it because I want this to work.
I love that collaboration. Well, we have a couple minutes left, and I think that's a wonderful opportunity to just give each of you a chance to offer some parting thoughts or touch on anything else you'd like.
I guess I'll go first. I mean, I think one thing that we always try and help entrepreneurs, even if we don't invest, to Raj's point, there's a network and sort of a group of investors out there who are passionate about areas like deep tech, areas like climate. Feel free to reach out, connect. It may not be a fit for us, but I may well know somebody I can help you with.
Yeah, like I said earlier, we're not specifically impact, but we are mission driven. I spent time with U.S. Cyber Command and in the government doing several different things. So for a lot of our founders, they are mission driven, whether they come from the government or not, and they're trying to solve hard problems that affect everyone from a J.P. Morgan bank down to a chain of dental offices down the street that could get ransomware. So it's for folks that are mission driven.
Yeah, I would say often what I'm hearing from people that are considering going into climate is that two things. One is that it's really overwhelming. There's just too much out there. I can never become a master of this domain. It's not for me. And my answer there is that everything reduces down to a systems problem. It's kind of like first principles in what Elon did. You know, he wasn't a car maker when he started Tesla, but he went through every decision and said, why do they do it this way? Well, why does that happen? Why does that happen? And some of them he got right. I think he got a lot right. Some of them he got wrong, like those windows, those doors that open up in our car. But in general, I think that everything can be reduced down to a systems problem. So don't be afraid, even if it feels like something that is difficult. Because there's so much buttressing, so many modules that are the object-oriented programming that's going up that you don't need to know machine language, you know, as an example in doing it. So I think that, to me, is probably the biggest one.
Well, thank you all so much. It's been truly a pleasure.
Great.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.